Hey, welcome back to the channel. We're about a month away from the federal election, and both the Conservatives and the Liberals have announced the first phase of their housing platform. In this week's video, we're going to talk about how one of the policies might be significantly better than the other. And of course, I'm going to give you a feet on the street perspective of just where we're at as we head to the end of March. Real quick, if this is your first time to the channel, my name is Hassan. I'm a real estate agent in the Vancouver area, and I make educational real estate content to help you on your real estate journey. When I'm not making videos like this, I'm helping people just like you buy and sell real estate across the Lower Mainland. So if that sounds interesting to you and you want to chat with me one-on-one, you can book me for a free call in the Calendly link below or on screen, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a future video. All right, hope you had a wonderful week. We're gonna jump right into it. We're about a month away from the election, as I mentioned, and now, both of the leading parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals, coming pretty fast and furious with their policies. And of course, a large chunk of that surrounds housing. And the interesting thing as we head towards this election is, at least initially, both housing platforms are looking very much the same with a few key differences. So maybe what we'll do is we'll talk about Mark Carney and the Liberals, what they've proposed so far. We'll jump over to the Conservatives. Now, if you follow my channel for a bit, I like to stay away from the politics as much as I can. But, it's just the nature of the housing market and how housing works here nationally. The intersection of housing, real estate, and politics, you can't avoid it. So we're very likely to be talking about a lot of this sort of policy and maybe some back and forth between the leading parties when it comes specifically to housing. So we'll start with Mark Carney and the Liberals, and they announced last week how they were going to they pledged to remove the GST on homes, new homes up to $1 million for first-time buyers. Now, if that sounds a little bit familiar to you, it should, because this is actually what the Conservative government was proposing back at the end of last year, except without the first-time buyer component. And so what happened is Mark Carney and the Liberals, they announced this change, and then Pierre Poilievre, very likely his original plan from October anyways, basically came out and said, look, we are going to do the same. We're going to waive the GST on new homes, but we're going to do that up to $1.3 million, and we're going to do it for all buyers. It doesn't matter if you're a first-time buyer, doesn't matter if you've bought multiple properties before. $1.3 million on all new homes, GST is waived. So when we look at these two policies, at face value, you'll look at it and you'll say, okay, the Liberal government, they're trying to look after the first-time home buyer. They're really trying to focus in and hone in on them. And maybe you'll look at it on the Conservative side and say, well, they're kind of putting an incentive out there for everyone, for investors to get involved. I believe Jagmeet Singh was saying that rich developers and investors are really going to jump on to that Conservative policy because there's no first-time buyer component, and it being up to 1.3 million. Now, for us, if you're here where I'm at in the Vancouver area, the difference between a $1 million property and 1.3 in the new construction space is very significant. So with the Conservative policy at 1.3 million, part of the premise of it is that people in high cost of living areas like Vancouver, like Toronto, will also get to benefit from this sort of a policy. For example, if you're stuck at $1 million, and I know that sounds like a first world problem, but if you're stuck at $1 million, you're not able to get certain product types in certain areas. You're not going to get a townhome in the Vancouver area. When you increase that to 1.3, it now opens it up not just to, again, high cost of living places, but it opens up the product type. So now a buyer can purchase a townhome, in certain areas in the Lower Mainland where that $1 million cap, sure, in most areas across Canada, not very restrictive, but here in Vancouver, it's a pretty big restriction. I think, the other key component of this is, the first-time buyer versus all the rest of the buyers, whether they're second-time, whether they're investors. The reality is this is an incentive that's geared around pre-sales and new construction product. And I've talked about it on my channel before that first-time buyers, they are not pre-sale purchasers generally speaking. Now, most first-time buyers, they are buying because they are on due to time sensitivity. So for example, they may be renting right now and all of a sudden the landlord comes and says, look, have to give you notice, I've sold the property. And now that first time buyer is thinking, okay, rather than rent again, I'm going to get into the market. So they are not a pre-sale purchaser. This sort of a program does not help that first time buyer. It's very rare in my world and speaking with other agents that first-time buyers come and request specifically on pre-sales. And generally, I find when that does happen, again, in my experience, it's someone who's truthfully not quite ready even for a pre-sale purchase. And what I mean by that is they're looking at buying a pre-sale solely with the idea that they're going to flip this pre-sale afterwards. They don't necessarily have a means to complete. If you follow my channel for a bit, I've talked a lot about pre-sale risks and purchasing condos in order to flip them, how risky that is. I find that generally the first-time buyers that want to get into the pre-sale market in that sense, they're looking at it from an investment angle, and their option A is that they're going to flip this property. So it's not the pre-sale product's not good for the first-time buyer anyways. And we have to keep in mind that in order for these pre-sales and these condos to be built, the sales have to come in advance. They have to come at pre-sale. And so you need the investor in order to get these housing units built so that they may be there, at completion for a first-time buyer. Kind of like what we're seeing in Brentwood, different areas of Burnaby where we have this new construction and we have it completed. People have just, they've paid out on it. They're vacant properties now. And now a lot of the buyers on those properties, they are brand new, are first-time buyers. But because they're not buying it off of the developer as new construction, none of this sort of applies. So, the premise behind the $1.3 million from the conservatives is it's twofold. It's to help all buyers, again, no matter where you are in Canada. It's so that, you can benefit on it no matter where you live, whatever type of buyer you are. But at the same time, it's so that people will invest into these pre-sales and get these units built. Now, if we look at it on the flip side, we know that pre-sale in general has been struggling. I think it was 2 or 3 videos I did a full scope on what's happening in the pre-sale market. And this is on the radar for both the conservatives and the liberals. Bob Rennie, Condo King, he came out and said how he was in chats with Mark Carney about a potential foreign buyer program to try and get more shovels in the ground, try and get more units sold so that we can actually see the next phase of housing, which is going to hit in 4 or 5 years. And in that same video, we talked about how the provincial government now here locally is promoting housing investment, which you would never hear generally from the BC NDP, but they're also realizing that we need this investment. So when we look at these 2 federal plans, at least these 2 components of it, we have one, in my opinion, that's actually going to help to stimulate at that pre-sale stage with the 1.3 million and open to all purchasers, versus the liberal, up to $1 million for first-time buyers. I just don't think the adoption rate is going to be there, and I don't think it's going to actually help to get the shovels in the ground. In my personal experience, pre-sales, again, in my world, generally I will work with a client to help them purchase their principal residence. And for their second property, usually that's a year later or sometimes even sooner than that, they'll reach out again. We'll be in communication. They'll say, look, we're really happy in our place. What do you think about pre-sales? And this happens all the time in my world. They're already situated in a place. Again, perhaps they had to move because they were a tenant. Perhaps they just got married, so they wanted to purchase their first place. These life events that put the first-time buyer in a time-sensitive position to have to purchase. And once they get the principal residence, this is the way you should always do it. Then they start looking at the investment angle and they think, okay, pre-sales might be the way to go. So, the long and short of it is it's a very interesting time right now, right? We have obviously all of the trade war implications from the US. We have a new prime minister, if you will, although we have an election coming up in a month. And from a political standpoint, it's the way it looks, the way it appears is the Liberals are, with Mark Carney, who has a whole host of experience. So far, it seems as if they're basically taking the best ideas that they know the people like about the conservative platform, and that's the GST being waived, but then also the carbon tax, the consumer carbon tax. They won't use the term axe the tax, but so they got rid of that. They're taking the best of the conservatives while at the same time trying to make that connection between Pierre and Donald Trump. And honestly, it might be a winning strategy. It's a twofold strategy, might actually work because, the biggest fear amongst consumers right now that's impacting our market right now is the trade war uncertainty with the US. And that's what's happening in terms of our spring market, here in Vancouver. Not as robust as a typical spring. We have about 5 days left in the month. And we're going to be down off of last year's number, which was down off of the year before's number. And if we really stop and think about it, we had significantly higher interest rates last year until April. April is when they started coming down. So what we can surmise from all of this, and they've come down significantly, what we can surmise from all of this is rates matter. They do. But more importantly than that, is consumer confidence and consumer sentiment. And it's just not there yet. And so the people that, again, are transacting right now are the people that are having life changes. For example, separations and divorces. In my world, it's happening, truthfully, all over the place. Over the last year and a half, seen so many and worked with so many scenarios like that. Again, first-time buyers perhaps purchasing their first home. They're continuing to make a move. Downsizers that need to sell a property and move, they have to do it by a certain period of time. They're making a move. Job change, moving locations, those moves are still happening. So the necessities are still transacting. But anything beyond that, it's a lot of a wait and see type of approach. And I personally think until we get some clarity on what's happening with US, Canada, and clarity on who's going to be the prime minister moving forward, housing is going to be on the back burner, right? There's just so much. There's too much going on right now to focus on making a change that's not a necessary change. So circling it back to, the two housing platforms, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in terms of who the prime minister will be. We've been basically neck and neck in the polls. What's very interesting to see is most of the polls that are showing a segmented breakdown of which age is voting for who, you have that 60 years old plus pretty much, leading the liberal charge. And then every other age segment is leaning conservatives, again, with both neck and neck in the polls. And you can see it because generally speaking, baby boomers have done very well under this government. But if we look at every other segment of the population, I think it'd be very tough for a lot of people to say that they are better off than they were 8 or 9 years ago. So as we move towards the end of April, as new housing policies come out, which I'm sure they will from the major parties, I will cover them on this channel. So if you want to follow along, you may want to subscribe to this channel so you can see future videos. And like I mentioned off the top, it's an interesting time in the market right now. So if you want to chat about the market, gain any sort of individualized insight, you can book me for a free call, or you can just give me a call, send me a text. All my contact info is in the description box below. But I want to thank you again for watching this week's video, and I look forward to seeing you next week.